Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Mrs. Ross Does Math. This is for Math 7, and our topic is Lesson 7, Solving Proportions in Word Problems. Let's go ahead and get this started. As I just said, our topic for today is Lesson 7, Solving Proportions in Word Problems. Now, many of you are going to see those two words, word problems, and are going to be like, oh my goodness. Don't worry, I'm going to talk you through it, okay? So, our essential question to get things going for today is this here. Am I able to solve problems by writing and solving equations? So, today we're going to get a bit of instruction on how we can go about writing these and ultimately solving these. Now, one question that's commonly asked is, how am I ever going to use this? Word problems are often used, especially with proportions, in real-world situations. You'll use this in cooking. You'll use this in construction. Those are two big fields where proportions are going to come into play. So I want you to have the skills for later on down the road to be able to utilize this. Now, as we proceed through this, I've given you a couple of steps to solve it, okay? There are 4 steps to create an equation out of a word problem and solve it. So that's what our steps are going to be focused on. Now, our first step, when we have a word problem, is to identify the variable and what it represents. So, in a word problem, it's not going to say X seconds. It's going to say, find how many seconds it'll take to travel 4 feet. So you're going to need to pay attention to some of the wording that's there. Our second step is that we are going to go ahead and write our proportion and make sure our units match. Now the key word here is units. So if I have feet and units in my problem, I'm going to need to make sure that the information for feet is going to be on top and the seconds is going to be on the bottom. I don't want to have the feet and the seconds be on one side and then it be seconds feet on the other. We want to have the units match. Next, we're going to go ahead and solve our proportion. So once we set it up, we're going to go ahead and solve it. And again, we solved it using cross products. Okay, so I'm going to throw that in there. And then lastly, because it is a word problem, we need to have words in our answer. So once we find our answer, we're going to go ahead and write it in a sentence. Okay. Now, the steps to solving these proportions is not anything different than the equations that you saw in the previous assignment for lesson 6 where you were solving proportions. The same idea is going to happen here, only you're not going to be given the equation, you're going to have to write it. So, I have an example problem for you, and we're going to work on this one together. Our example problem says, Mandy read 180 pages in 4 hours. How long will it take her to read 225 pages at this rate? So once again, our question says, Mandy read 180 pages in 4 hours. How long will it take her to read 225 pages at this rate? So in looking at this, I'm going to go ahead, take my highlighter, and I'm going to highlight some important pieces. I have 180 pages, so I'm going to highlight that. I have 4 hours. I'm going to highlight that. I have 225 pages, and then I have a missing piece of information. Now in this, it says, how long will it take her? Since it says how long, that is referencing our time. So our X is time. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to set up an equation using 180 pages, 4 hours, x for time, and 225 pages. Now at the start of my problem, I see 180 pages first. So to begin my proportion, I'm going to have 180 pages on top. Now, Mandy read 180 pages in 4 hours. So I'm going to put this over 4 hours. Next, we need to make sure that the units match. So, since I have pages on top, I'm going to need my other pages piece on top as well. So that means I'm going to set this equals to 225 pages. And it asked us, how long will it take for her to read 225 pages at this rate? So that means that our x, that's hours. So I'm going to put x hours underneath. Now, from here, we're going to go ahead and go through and solve our proportion, and we are going to use those cross products. So we are going to begin by multiplying diagonally. Now remember, we just used the numbers. So I'm going to go 4 times 225, and I'm going to set that equals to 180 times x. Now 4 times 225 is going to go ahead and give me 900, and that's going to be equals to 180x. Now next, because 180 and x are combined through multiplication, I'm going to need to divide on both sides. So I'm going to divide this by 180, and I'm going to divide this by 180. Now that means that my x is equals to 5. So we can circle that. But ultimately, once again, it's a word problem, so we need to make sure that our answer has words in it. So over on the side, I'm going to say, it would take Mandy 5 hours, because that's what we were finding, to read 225 pages. And that would ultimately be our final answer. So once again, we went through and we identified that our two pieces of information, our two units, are pages and hours. So we set up an equation showing pages on top, hours in the bottom, and once again, pages up top and hours in the bottom. Now it says Mandy read 180 pages in 4 hours, so those two numbers are linked together. And it asked us how long will it take her to read 225 pages at this rate. So she read 225 pages in X number of hours. We used our cross products or our cross multiplication to solve. So we went 4 times 225, 180 times X. 225 times 4 is 900, so we get 900 equals 180x. Then we divided by 180, giving us x is equals to 5. And because it's a word problem, we need words in our answer. We wrote, it would take Mandy 5 hours to read 225 pages. Okay. So, over on the side, I'm going to go ahead and flip this. We are going to go ahead and write a little summary. Okay, now once again, our summary is where we're answering our essential question. So your sentence frame today says, I can solve proportions in word problems by ... You need to fill in that by. Now, if you have any questions on this, please pause this video, rewind it, go back to any section that you need to, rewatch it, leave me a comment, send me a message, anything that I can do to help you guys better understand this material. Now, Like I said at the beginning of this video, these notes are going to be together with your Lesson 7 worksheet. Now your Lesson 7 worksheet is going to look just like this. It'll say Math 7, Lesson 7. This is problem solving with proportions. Okay. Now for numbers 1 and 2, I've given you an introduction to this once again. So here, when we take a look at this, please make sure that you write your name, the class period, and the date. And then, please be sure to read the instructions. For numbers 1 and 2, it says solve each proportion. So, we're going to go through and I'm going to solve numbers 1 and number 3 with you on this worksheet to get you going. To begin with, for number 1, we have 7/9 equals x over 63. Once again, we're going to cross multiply together. So I'm going to go 7 times 63, and I'm going to go equals 9 times x. We get 9x, and I get, 441. 7 times 63, yep, 441. So 441 is equals to 9x. Now, we're going to divide on both sides by 9, giving us x is equals to, and that happens to be 49. Now, because this is not a word problem, we can simply leave that as our answer. Next, when we take a look at numbers 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on, each problem is going to follow these instructions. Our instructions state, solve each problem using a proportion. As these are word problems, be sure to write your final answer in a sentence. So I need you guys to make sure that you're making an attempt to do that. Now once again, using our notes, it says to identify the variable and what it represents as our first part of our problem. Now our problem says a bicyclist rides 18 miles in 2 hours. How far will the bicyclist ride at this speed in 5 hours? Okay. So here we have 18 miles, 2 hours, we have 5 hours, and it's asking us how far. Since it says how far, our variable is going to equal distance, and in this case our distance was the word miles. So we're going to be looking at X number of miles. Next, we need to write our proportion and make sure that the units match. Because we see 18 miles first, I'm going to write that on top, 18 miles. And that is going to be in 2 hours. So I'm going to put 2 hours down below. Now I'm going to set this equals, again, our X was miles. We don't know how many miles that this person traveled, but they did travel it in 5 hours. So we're going to put that number down below. Next, we are going to cross multiply. This is us solving our proportion. This is step 3. So I'm going to go 18 times 5, which is going to be 90, and that's going to be equals to 2x. Because again, I get 18 times 5 equals 2 times x. Now, we're going to divide by 2 on both sides, giving us 45 is equals 2x. Now, once again, that x was miles. So we are going to write the bicyclist rode 45 miles in 5 hours. And because I'm going to be looking at your answers, please be sure to underline what that X is in your final statement. So once again, we went through and identified that we have 18 miles, we have 2 hours, we have 5 hours, and it asks us how far will the bicyclist ride? How far means distance, and our distance was miles. So, since we saw that 18 miles is our first piece of information, we put the miles on top and the hours in the denominator. So that's how we got 18 miles over 2 hours. And that equaled our X miles in 5 hours. 18 times 5 is 90. 2 times X is 2X. So we divided by 2, giving us 45 is equals to X. Now lastly, these are word problems, so you need to write your final answer in a sentence. So, our answer in a sentence, the bicyclist rode 45 miles in 5 hours. Once again, if you guys have any questions at all, please feel free to rewatch this video, rewind it, send me a message, leave me a comment. I'm here to help you any way I can. Thank you so much for watching. This has been Mrs. Ross Does Math.